Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Going Virtual, Why, When, and How to Do It Well. So glad you're here. My name is Jean Bell. I coordinate these leadership webinars for Nonprofit Quarterly. We took a month off and we're back. A lot of you took a month off too, so we're glad you're with us today to talk about something that's just become pervasive in the workforce in general and certainly in nonprofits, which is degrees of being virtual or going fully virtual. And we have a great panel of folks that have prepared to share their stories, their tools, their ideas with you about how to do this well. What I'd like to do first is remind you about NPQ's membership program. Some of you here are members and some of you aren't. This is actually part of our Leading Edge membership program. And what you see on the screen are all the things that come with that. It's really an active users leadership learning community, right? We do leadership webinars like this monthly. You get a digital subscription to the magazine, access to our archives, etc. So it's really a great way to be highly engaged in NPQ content. You see some of the most beautiful recent covers of the magazine, which has really been reconceived under the editorial leadership of Cindy Suarez. So if you want to learn more about membership, if you're not currently a member, it's in the upper right-hand corner of our website, and you can learn more about that. But thank you so much for being here. Today's webinar is 90 minutes. We will be providing you a full recording with the slides this coming Monday, probably 3 days from now, so don't worry about that. We use the Q&A box for questions and comments, and you can upvote one another's comments. So that's really the interactive space to connect with me as the moderator and to ask questions of the panelists. We always do a pop-up evaluation, so please stay on as we close the session. A very brief survey will emerge, and we'll ask you to just spend 90 seconds giving us some feedback about this content and about future content you'd like to see. With that, I am really excited to welcome Danny, Casey, and Burton, all of whom are living the experience of virtual leadership, virtual organizations. And I'm going to start with some introductions. So Danny, welcome.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here. So I am Danny Ayers. I use pronouns she and her. I serve as CEO of Me Too International, which is the organization that undergirds the work of the Me Too movement. And I am based in Atlanta, Georgia, and happy to be here again.
Thank you so much for your work and for being here today. Casey?
Thanks, Jean. Happy to be here, everyone. My name is Casey Henderson. I am she, her also. I am the Executive Director of the Usenix Association. We are the Advanced Computing Systems Association, and I live and work in Long Beach, Washington.
Great. Hi, Burton.
Hi, I'm Burton Lee. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the CEO of Sutro Lee, Accounting for Great Causes. We're a outsourcing firm that provides accounting services and CFO services for nonprofits. I live in Truckee and San Francisco. I live between two different locations, both in California, and I work from home. I'm in Truckee, California today.
Wonderful. It's a beautiful part of the state. Thank you all. And we're going to get a lot more into your stories in a second, but let's find out who's in this virtual room. Anya, can I ask you to run our first poll? And as we always do, this tells us kind of who's in the room, what roles you're playing right now. So this is a multiple choice. If you're both a board member somewhere and a staff person, or an ED and a board member, feel free to choose anything that's an active role for you now. Okay, so we've got about just over half of folks who are a staff person but not the CEO, a fifth who are CEOs, a fifth who serve on boards, and some consultants and volunteers. So it's a great mix of folks, and a lot of folks who we're going to find out now where they are on this journey. Are they considering it? Are they halfway in? Are they fully virtual? So Anya, if you can run that second poll. And the question is, how virtual is your organization now? Not very, but we're exploring it. Partially virtual, fully virtual, or some other status. Oh, interesting. Okay. So we have some early explorers, some folks who are in a state of quasi virtual, as we talked about, and then some who are fully virtual and here to learn and share practices, which is great. Thank you, Anya, for sharing both those polls. So where I want to start is each of you, which makes this such an exciting panel, kind of comes at this from a different experience. Danny and the Me Too organization were founded virtual, right? And we're going to hear about that. Casey's been through a process of transforming to virtual. And I guess it's fair to say, Burton, that as a consultant too, you've evolved to fully support organizations in their capacity to be virtual. And of course, you're quite virtual as well in your firm. So we're all you all bring different stages of experience to this. And I want to start with you, Danny, and just if you can share in a few minutes kind of the why story. Why was Me Too founded as a virtual organization?
Yeah. So in the spirit of the way that the Me Too hashtag came into the world, which was a viral moment in 2017, where 12 million people tweeted Me Too in 24 hours to indicate their experience with some form of sexual violence. And Tarana Burke, the founder of the movement back decades ago, and I building this organization together, we really wanted to be able to answer the call of those 12 million survivors and the others who we want and seek in our work to support along their healing journeys, no matter where they are on their healing journeys and no matter where they are in the world. And so because our work was going to be broad and intersectional in all kinds of ways, we really felt like the organization's infrastructure should match that in some ways. And so we designed the organization as, decentralized, as not having a one physical location, and so that we could engage people on our team, both as staff members, as consultants, no matter where they were. So we didn't want to be restricted in who we could work with, and really just wanted to bring the right minds to the table to work with us. And so it made sense for us to be virtual and in the delivery of our programs be at both virtual and in person in some ways. So we very much felt like the work that we wanted to do really needed to match the infrastructure of the organization at a really core level. And yeah, it's really been one of the best decisions we made. And it, was right before the pandemic, or it was a year or so before the pandemic. And so turned out that it was really helpful because we didn't have to pivot in the wake of lockdowns. We were able to just sort of operate as we typically would.
Thank you. And I see a question that I'll just ask you each to address as we go through this. I love that story about it matching the programming and sort of ethos of your organization. How many employees and closely held contractors and such do you have, Danny? How big is the organization?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think that's one of the things that most folks don't know about the Me Too organization. They think we're massive, and we are not at all. We are a young organization that we were founded in 2018. And, like I said, in the wake of the hashtag, we have now 13 full-time staff, but our work very much leans on the expertise of project-based experts and the skill sets of some amazing curriculum writers and comms folks and folks that help us work on our national and international narratives. So all in, we're probably at just about 30 or so folks who kind of make this work happen every day.
Perfect. Thank you. Let me turn to you, Casey, and you could answer that question and then get into the story of why you transformed to virtual.
Sounds good. So Usenix is a membership association, and we serve the community of researchers and engineers working on the cutting edge of computing. We've been around for almost 50 years, and we have been moving towards virtual since 2018. That's when we made our decision to do that. I am one of 13 staff members, so Danny and I have that in common. And I say that's our current number of staff members. That is changing and has changed a lot over the past few years as we've responded to the pandemic. I am in my 10th year of service as executive director and my 20th year of service at Usenix. So as we have considered the ways our organization has evolved over time, we've responded very much to who our organization is, who we're representing, and the innovation that exists within that organization and is part of our mission. So as we've done that, we've also tried to stay viable and sustainable as an organization. So I inherited an organization that was suffering from a significant deficit and also was really behind the times when it came to technology. Ironically, because we serve the Advanced Computing Systems Association, we had set up a lot of our services internally in ways that became outdated as the world evolved. And so it was my duty to the organization to figure out how best to run the organization effectively and efficiently. And the answer to that for us was to become virtual. So it was a strategic decision for staff retention, achieving a better work-life balance and greater efficiency for our team. It was a mission-oriented decision focused on our community and how best we could serve them. And at its core, it was financial to reduce our costs. Going fully remote as an organization saves us a tremendous amount of money annually. And that is one of the most compelling reasons to do it, but you have to do it very intentionally.
Thank you. A whole set of reasons, compelling reasons. Interesting to note that neither of you was it the pandemic, though. So, the pandemic obviously accelerated this trend, but everybody on this call, which excited me about working with you as a panel, made this decision prior to the pandemic for other reasons. Burton.
So I also have a team of 13.
Okay, well, yeah.
I have a team of 13 people on my US team. I also have a team of around 48 in India, in Pune, India. So we're a little over 60 all told, but my US team is 13 and we're all over the US. I've been doing work in nonprofit accounting for about 20 years. And when I started, the model 20 years ago was very different, and I was mostly bicycling from shop to shop around the Bay Area and meeting people there and working on local desktop databases and printing up check stubs and lots of paper, lots of filing, lots of very physical in-office ways of doing this sort of work. And I've been watching the technology change, and the technology that was available 20 years ago is a lot different than what we have now. And so as technology has evolved and made different tools and different processes available, there's been a greater interest in moving in that direction. And I've sort of just been following that and learning and adapting what we do as we go. So it was really driven by the availability of that model. It was 2015 when we really moved and sort of closed our physical office in San Francisco and had everybody begin working from home. So it was well before the pandemic. It was really about efficiency at that time in many ways. My staff didn't want to come to the office if they could work from home. Carbon usage, commute, travel, time, all of that, we are saving a lot in terms of energy efficiency there. It is arguably more environmental. You can get, you can reach out to a broader pool of people. You can attract talent from a broader area. Being located in the Bay Area, which is one of the most expensive places to live in the country, there's some financial benefits to considering opening up where you can recruit from, it's more of a funny small aside to our story, but when we were working in person on databases, when we were working together all in one office on databases, but then we switched the technology to being cloud-based at the beginning of 2015, everything slowed down because everybody in the office was fighting through one router to get all of their packets back and forth. So just in many ways, it was about efficiency for us and sort of keeping up with where I felt like the nonprofit community was headed.
Fantastic. Thank you. And thanks for your work in supporting organizations to make this move if it's right for them. I want to ground us in a mistake I made, which I learned quickly once I got to meet this panel. I had this list of sort of traditional questions that someone curating this webinar might have, including somewhere down the list, how do you cultivate culture in a virtual organization? And Casey and Danny in particular pounced on that and said I had it backwards. So I'm putting that right up front because it was a good lesson for me, which it's not to think about it as how do we create culture virtually, but what I learned from the two of you especially is that how do we make our virtual practices an expression of our existing commitments, culture, values, and may seem subtle, but I think it's an important flip, especially for organizations who may be making the transition, right? And thinking that they're going to think about culture at the back of that transition. So I wanted to ask you to just share with us, maybe starting with Casey, a couple of those most important values that inform your approach to virtual, not the other way around. Casey?
Sure. So for us, I always try to start from our organization. So I learned a long time ago from Compass Point to stand in the circle of our mission and think about where we begin. And for us, Usenix is about the sharing of information openly. It's about transparency and communication, and it's about agility and responding to change. And all of those are values that I hold dear myself personally. So it's an easy place to start, and we always come back to those. And then additionally, I also strongly value inclusivity, and so does our community of constituents, and that's become more and more the case over time. So as we do all of that, as we start from all of that, we make our decisions based on those principles, and we did that well in advance of our decision to become virtual. We did not know that was where we were going to end up. I started taking us down this road responding to the needs of the organization. As I mentioned, we had a budget deficit that we needed to address, and also the needs of our staff and how our culture was evolving. We did not have a great deal of boundaries within our organization, and I wanted to create those to protect the staff and myself, including me, of course, because I'm trying to model that kind of leadership throughout the organization. And as I considered all of those values, we went down a path of that ultimately took us to becoming a virtual organization in its entirety. But that's, I think, part of something to consider in all of this is you don't necessarily know where you're going when you go through one of these journeys. And when you begin with your culture and all of these decisions, you will end up in the place you need to be for your organization, whether that is becoming a fully remote organization or not. It could be that your decision is not to become one because that doesn't align with your values. So that's something to consider as well when you're thinking about culture.
Thanks, Casey. Danny, what would you add?
Yeah, much of that resonates with me in terms of what Casey shared around the values of their organization. And I think for us, as I mentioned, we are in service to survivors of sexual violence and in service to working to advocate to interrupt the issue of sexual violence. And in order for us to do that, we start from that place ongoingly and every single day. And so in order to do that really well, it not only informed our infrastructure and kind of how we built the organization, but it influences what we value and how we think of ourselves and ultimately our culture. And so, we have a very clear commitment to survivor leadership inside of the organization and also what we advocate for in our mission. We believe survivors have the answers on their own healing and the actions that need to happen to interrupt the issue. And so because of that, we operate as a trauma-informed organization, which means that often we have to provide a spaciousness for our teams to show up as their whole selves and not be perfect and some sort of representative of themselves, but really their whole selves. And it's a difficult balance because we value both excellence and rigor in the work, but also the ability to be who you are and take the time you need because we are trauma informed. So there's a spaciousness that being remote allows for our team members. We also have a deep value in wellness for all those reasons I just mentioned. And we have found as we've continued to have conversations with our team, because we made the decision to be virtual, and we continue to ask the question as to whether that remains where we should be. And so the responses we get is that there is an ability for folks to take care of themselves in a particular way when they are virtual, easier than it would be if they were in an office. The other thing I would mention is that we value an entrepreneurial spirit on our team. We're very clear that anyone we hire needs to feel as though they are the boss of their own scope of work. And that is, having the ability to come on to the team and really have a self-motivated work ethic and an entrepreneurial spirit allows for us to have the confidence that folks are getting everything they need to get done. And we know the data says that people actually don't lose their work production when they're at home at all. But it allows for us to really ensure that people have that flexibility and freedom to work how they want to work because they are the bosses of their own scope. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Super helpful. Yeah, entrepreneurial, wellness, working how we want to work. These are all really compelling reasons. I want to get into a bit of the technical, because a big piece of this is figuring out what and how to outsource key infrastructure pieces of the organization. And I know that PEOs are a significant part of that, right? So let's find out from both Casey and Danny in particular how you decided to go that route and kind of what the status is now and what guidance you have specific to PEOs. Casey, do you want to start?
Sure. So first, I think PEOs are a great idea regardless of how you work as an organization, whether you have a physical office, whether you work partially remotely, fully remotely, or whatever. We made the decision to work with a PEO long before we ever considered the idea of doing away with our physical office. So working with a PEO came about by our decision to outsource any aspect of our organization that wasn't tied to our critical mission and that need not be done by a full-time staff member. And so we started looking at those different aspects, and a PEO is a pretty well-rounded full-service organization that gives us complete payroll services, HR resources, gives us very easy support for a distribution of staff geographically. Even when we still had a physical office, we began our journey to remote by having one staff member decide to move, and we decided, okay, that was fine, but how are we going to do that? And having a PEO is a great way to support that. Also, all of our nonprofit organizations are small, and when it comes to the staff size, we happen to each have 13 staff members. That makes us a very small organization when it comes to the power of what we can offer. And working with a PEO suddenly makes us a much larger organization because all of a sudden we have access to many more benefits when it comes to insurance, 401k management, all of that good stuff. And all of us don't have to be experts in this way. We're paying other people to do that. And the math works. It is very affordable ultimately to pay for a PEO as opposed to having all of these resources in-house. But it's a scary transition to go through, particularly if you have those existing practices in place. But I can assure you that it does turn out to be affordable.
Thank you for that background. Danny, what's your story around the PEO selection?
Yeah. So I've worked in environments of, that have had kind of the in-house oversight and also the PEO structure. Originally, I didn't think super deeply about it outside of the fact that we started out with a really small team, even smaller than we are now. And so it made sense to be able to provide the benefits that we wanted to provide. The only way that I could make it make sense is to bundle together with other nonprofit organizations inside of a PEO to get the kind of rates on those benefits that we could actually afford. So it was really a financial decision on the front end, but it has been so helpful to have a PEO, because as I started to hire folks in different states to get at, I know someone asked a question about this, spending the energy and time and, to figure out the requirements of all of those states and, the way that those employees need to be taxed and paid, the benefits structures. I'm able to rely on my PEO to have oversight on that and ensure that we are in compliance with all of the various laws that exist. And that has been amazing from this perspective. That's probably been the biggest help, is knowing that that's taken care of. I don't have to worry about that, and that they're there to ask questions. And this is what they do, right? I can call on them for the skill set anytime. So it's been really, really helpful to have that infrastructure in place, and rely on the communication. I will say that there are so many out there now, and we go through a process every other year or so of just looking around, making sure that the PEO of choice is still the right one for us. And, investigating others and the benefits that they provide. But it paid for itself immediately and continues to.
Thank you. That's super helpful. And we'll get back to some other infrastructure pieces. I love the way you said that, Casey, that your sort of idea was to outsource anything that wasn't sort of a mission-driven, mission-critical piece. I can't remember exactly how you said it. Burton, let's talk a little bit about how you think about supporting virtual organizations at Sutro Lee.
Well, if we're talking specifically about tools and technologies, we try to get our organizations to use a cloud-based tech stack. We call it a suite of applications that work together to provide a function. We call that a tech stack. Mm-hmm. And we provide the guidance on how to adopt those softwares, and then also the training for staff people to use them. One of the key frameworks that we focus on when helping clients go virtual is internal control, and making sure that there are adequate ways of documenting sign-off between different key decision points in the process of running your organization. So, you can imagine an in-person office, you might have a check requisition form, and you might take it to the person who needs to sign off on it and actually put it physically in front of them. And then they might sign off on it, and you get their signature, and then you can file that and move things forward. Those sorts of all of that disappears, right? You don't have that anymore. And we work with a lot of auditors. We saw some resistance initially about, I'd say 10 years ago. Auditors were a little uncomfortable with virtual audits, and they still wanted to do in-person. They still wanted to see the paper. There was a doubt. There was a question about the validity of a digital artifact versus a physical artifact. That's all changed now. It was shifting rapidly, and then COVID just sort of kicked it all the way to the end of that whole cycle. And now all auditing firms that I'm aware of are very, very comfortable with auditing internal control and auditing accounting records from digital records. So we look for ways to allow people to work digitally. From an account for the accounting tools, we recommend Xero, Bill.com, Pluto, Giraffe, Helm, and Gusto. These are a number of applications, and we'll provide the links for all of those in the follow-up information if anybody wants to check any of those out. We also recommend PEOs, like we just discussed. If one of our very early questions is, do you have employees in multiple states, or do you plan to expand your team in multiple states? And if that's a yes, then we move to advising and sort of looking at different vendor options for PEOs if people don't already have that. We also take a look at whether or not people are working with staff internationally. There was a question in the chat about that. And if you do work with people internationally, you may need to look at having an international PEO as well as a domestic PEO. And then we have a lot of experience communicating and operating as a team and functioning virtually. And so we offer that as well. So we sort of work specifically in this accounting domain, but we end up having a lot of conversations about how to structure teams, how to run meetings, how to facilitate certain types of space within the organization. And we have a number of applications we also use for that. We use Asana for project management. We really like it. We use Notion for policies, procedure, and for a wiki type knowledge base within our team. And then of course, Slack for team communication and sort of real time knowing when people are online and when you can sort of reach out and talk to somebody. We use ShareFile for a virtual server. You have to also consider, if you're not going to have a physical location, you may need something like Earth class mail or virtual post mail. We use virtual post mail for having a post office box and a place to have a physical address. You will likely still need that. It's hard to get away from that entirely, especially with government compliance. And then just in terms of approach, last thing I'll say is we focus a lot on either meeting with people over Zoom or Meet or at least having a phone call once a month. Virtual can create a disconnection between people. And in accounting in particular, the world that I'm in, I hear all the time people complain like, oh, my accountant never emails me back, or I can't get them on the phone, or my accountant disappeared. I can't, like, they're buried and they can't get their attention. So we specifically go against that trend and try to make sure that we're very well connected and that we always have a meeting as an anchor for the next time that we are going to connect and actually be able to discuss what's going on. So being really simple things, but being cyclical and sort of habitual about making sure that certain things that need to happen are happening on a cycle is a big part of making it work for us.
Super helpful. And as you said, all the tools that are mentioned in this session will include in a follow-up email with the recording of the session in a few days. I want to hear about non-PEO, other than PEO kind of outsourcing from Casey and Danny. Danny, do you want to start just sharing a few of the other pieces of infrastructure that you outsource?
Well, the first one is we outsource our accounting and bookkeeping. We actually outsource it to Burton's team at Sutro Lee, and I was giggling to myself because it's very true that the team at Sutro Lee is very good with communication and staying in relationship with us. We absolutely love our point person, and we're never letting her go, Burton. So just so you know that you can't take her from us. But it has been huge because although I have a background in finance and I've certainly done the role of bookkeeping for organizations in the past, it's been such a relief to be able to have a team of people that essentially, operate very much like our director of finance like that is the functionality that we get from them, and that level of communication where every day we're able to communicate about different things that we need or questions that we have and things like that. It also adds a level of oversight and a level of like, our auditors really like that because it's not only bringing in the skill set, but also has another set of eyes, making sure that things are happening the way that they should, that oversight is there, and that we're constantly being advised on the changing dynamics in the world of accounting. I can rely on Sutra Lee to provide that. In addition, we outsource some of our comms. So we do have our graphic design has been outsourced. Actually, we may hire a full-time person now for that, just because of how much that work has become. But for the last several years, we've outsourced that, as well as our public relations engagement and press engagement has been outsourced. And that's a big part of our work. I think for every organization, it's thinking about like, what are your core functions? What are the things that are really key to your success as an organization, and making a decision around, do they need to be on staff versus can you outsource that skill set? There are, and this is something I've talked with Sutra Lee's team often about, is maintaining attention to the IRS requirements around whether someone needs to be on your staff versus if they can be a consultant. The IRS has gotten more and more paying attention to whether someone's should be on your full-time staff and you have them as a consultant. And they do look for that now more than I think they ever really have. So we try to keep close attention to that, which is why we're going to move graphic design in-house. And, of course, there are typical things that are outsourced, such as your auditing and things like that. But I really feel like our ability to operate as an organization also is based on the fact that we are a small organization with a really big name. So we actually have a team of lawyers that we have outsourced that are able to provide us with consultation around what happens when people use our name. There are all kinds of other groups that have tried to raise money in our name, for example, and just figuring out like, who do we kind of have to go talk to and who can we do nothing about, so we just leave them be, that kind of thing, as well is really important. And I can't, tell me if I should be mentioning anything about the platforms that we use.
No, we're going to get to tools in a second.
Okay.
We were just covering.
Okay. And I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you, Danny. Casey, other than the PEO and finance, what other key infrastructure elements are you outsourcing?
So I do want to tack on one thing to what Danny just said about finance. Since we are an organization that existed for a long time before we made these decisions, when you're thinking about outsourcing finance, one of the important considerations is, how are you already doing things and what kind of homegrown systems have you developed over time just to get by, which I think many of us who have smaller budgets have done. And that's something that kind of organization, and we are also a Sutra Lee client, and we're not here to just pitch Burton's team, although they're really great. There are many firms out there that align very well with your own values, and it's important to talk with each of those firms and talk about how you're currently operating and how that aligns again with your culture and values and how that will best serve you. So it just so happens that Sutra Lee was the best fit for us as an organization, but there might be others that will help you to figure out how best this could work for you, maintaining the systems that you already have in place or coaxing you out of those systems into something that might be more efficient. This kind of world of outsourcing finance has saved me personally, I would say, weeks of time every year. And that's truly significant. So that's something to strongly consider there. Other than finance, we outsource all of our IT. That was one of the very first things we did when we started to make these transitions. We had a long-term system administrator within our team who would also go to our conferences and deploy wireless networks before there was such a thing as standard Wi-Fi and venues for events. And so, that kind of, this is the kind of thing I was talking about. We did things before anyone else did, but then we had to figure out how to do them in the world that has changed. And outsourcing IT is a major one of those. There are many different firms that can offer you support in that way. We also outsource our high-level web development, our CRM development, and pretty much the vast majority of our technical work we do outside of our organization, which is a surprise to many people given that we're focused on technology, but we ourselves are not technologists. We're here to support the technologists. And that can be something that is challenging when you're looking at how to split these different aspects off of your business. If it's something that's tied to something that you do as part, or that is perceived as something that's core to your mission, there can be some tension there. But I'd encourage you to consider, what's actually good for how your nonprofit functions, as opposed to what business you need to accomplish internally and externally, despite what the label is on your organization. So those are the other aspects besides what Danny mentioned, and I agree with everything Danny said.
And I'm going to stay with you, Casey, because some of these words came from you during our planning session, and certainly some of the questions that people have are getting at these desires that people have for either creating or maintaining elements of how people work together. So you see on the screen serendipity, transparency, collaboration. What are some of the tools that you use, Casey, to get at some of these things with a virtual staff?
Sure. So I agree with many of the tools that Burton mentioned. So there's some overlap here with my list and his, and I know with Danny's as well. So one of the most important ones for us is to use some kind of a messaging program in combination with a virtual workspace. And that gets it almost all of these items on the list. So we use Slack in combination with Sococo. And the combination here that's important is that with Slack, you're messaging. And for those of you who know any kind of messaging platform, there's a little light that makes you green when you're active, and that little light can haunt you throughout your workday and into your evening. If, for example, you have Slack on your phone, just because it's on my phone and my light is on, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm actively working, but there can be a perception that you are, and this is something that happens both in person and virtual workplaces. So with the move to the virtual workplace, where we do not have the signal to everyone that I am closing my office door, turning out the light, and walking out, we have a virtual workspace that we sign into every day that indicates that we are at work. And when we are not there, we are not at work. So just because our Slack light is on, it doesn't mean that we are on. And that's part of the transparency aspect that we try to convey to everyone, that all of us could be working at any given time, but we do have boundaries, and we want those boundaries to be visible. But we also don't want to use these tools in such a way that make them too difficult for us to use. So we try to combine them to make them more effective for us. Getting to serendipity, which is something that I was most committed to maintaining when we left a physical environment, because as all of you know, when you work in a physical office, you can walk up to anyone and say, "Hey, I have this idea, let's chat about it," or you're talking at the proverbial water cooler and something comes up and it leads to a great idea that you might not have had otherwise. I did not want to lose that. And so we have several tools that tie into that, that also tie into maintaining social connections with one another. My favorite of these is Donut, which is a plugin for Slack. It randomly schedules time between two staff members to meet once every 2 weeks. And at our organization, we ask people to spend half an hour with one another and to talk about things that aren't work related. Inevitably, they will talk about things that are work related, but this helps to strengthen our bonds with one another, and it often produces those ideas that we're looking for. And it does it across team boundaries, which are much harder to cross over when you are not doing those kinds of, or having those kinds of interactions in a physical workplace. We also use project management software. We use Rike that allows us to collaborate and comment on each other's work. And we use that for individual teams and also for the team at large. We use Google Drive for document collaboration and rely heavily on the commenting and interactivity features within that to interact with one another asynchronously in particular. And we use Zoom primarily for our meetings and gatherings. And I mentioned the word gathering in particular because we do get together socially. That's something that we are committed to doing. It was easier to do in a physical office and would happen more spontaneously, but you have to plan for spontaneity in the virtual environment. So that's where something like Zoom comes in. And we try to make it a place that it's not just about being in a meeting, but it's also a place to interact. And finally, I'll also mention Retrium, which is a retrospective tool. And it allows for blameless and anonymous retrospectives, which we found to be even more necessary in a remote environment where we do struggle sometimes to maintain the connections across teams. And it was more difficult than just sitting around the table rehashing a project to do so in a Zoom room or via a Google Doc. So we rely on that tool to have that happen. And I'll also just say we have tried so many different tools. These are the tools we use now. We are committed to continuing to change our tools to adapt to the way our workplace is evolving. So we've used Slack huddles, we've used Whereby, we use Google Meet, we've used many, many different tools, and we still do in some cases. And we involve our entire team in the decision making about what tools we decide to retain, because these tools are only as good as the commitment of the users to use them. And if they don't want to use them, it's not worth keeping them around. So it's very important to walk away from something that isn't effective for you.
It's such a different approach than 10 or 15 years ago of, we've invested in something and we will use it, right? It's a very different mindset. So appreciate you underscoring that and sharing the number of resources that you did, which again, we will include in your follow-up email. Danny, is there anything you would add second in Casey's list of tools, or what would you add?
There's not much to add to the list of tools. I am very impressed by the number of tools that Casey has used and still uses. I'm like, oh my goodness, I've learned so much, and I'm definitely going to look into some of those. We use very few like platforms, I would say, because that's been sort of our team's desire, and they're, we've tried to add things and then they don't use it. And so we've gone kind of, instead of going wide, we go deep on the couple that we use. So, and I think someone asked about, engaging those who aren't as tech savvy, and that's, although, I think our folks are pretty tech savvy, but have definitely asked for us not to have too many things for them to have to check and go to. So I echo Slack, and I would say that what we've done is tried to, in going deep on Slack, is to create different channels for different things. So they're all in the same place, they're all in Slack, but we have one that's just about, one is called Love, that's just about shouting somebody out and saying like, I appreciate you, you did something dope today. It's people kind of loving up on each other. And then there's channels for different projects, and there's, but we definitely, there's a lot there that gets shared that's both not having to do with their jobs and having to do with just things that are going on in the world, or did you see this, or this article came out, and then channels that are specifically for projects. So, and then the only other platform I'd say that we use specifically for the work is the project management software Basecamp. And that allows for the accountability that we need to have according to who needs to see something, what is the deadline, and a clarity and transparency on who still needs to do the thing or review the thing. It's kind of there, and folks feel like, okay, I need to be accountable to Basecamp and my deadlines that are in there. And it has the ability to have multiple departments participating and commenting and getting things done in kind of one place. We use Google Docs for almost everything. In fact, some of my team, I have learned, do not even have Microsoft Office downloaded on their computers. They exclusively use Google Docs. And I'm like, that blows my mind, because I love my Microsoft Office, but they don't need it. They literally use Google Docs, Google Sheets for everything. And then I would just say, my last thing, that we really focus on what are the needs around relationship building when you're virtual. And so we do monthly wine downs, which are, and wine as in WINE. They're a little bit later. They're sort of like at the end of the day. And if you want to bring, a libation or something, if you want to bring your tea, if you want whatever, and it's a little bit work related, because it's like, how do you feel like everything's going? It's a way for people to, we have the ability for people to drop their comments and things like that. But it's much more social in nature. So it's kind of tries to take the form of what like a happy hour would be for folks who were in an office. You're going to talk about a little bit about work, but how do we make it fun? And sometimes we theme them and have people come in certain, with certain accoutrement, like on their heads or on their, whatever. And then the last thing I do want to add, that we have our weekly Zoom staff call. I require everyone to be on camera, because we do find that like being on camera all the time is really exhausting to people. And so we don't require being on camera for every single meeting, but this one staff meeting a week, everybody needs to be on camera, and we rotate check-ins. So every week someone else does a check-in question, and they're usually pretty fun, pretty like sort of icebreaker like, or getting to know the team. And everyone brings like their own little flair to it. So the dancer on the team wants everyone to get up and do a dance, and like, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So it sort of spreads the love in that way.
I love that. And that optional camera sometimes and mandatory camera others is a really basic but important practice. Burton, you already shared some tools, but is there anything you want to underscore in this tool conversation here?
No, I love hearing all this. I'll add just a few more things just as other ideas. So it's not really a technology, but the budget, thinking about your budget, and some things to budget for. We budget for ergonomics for home office. Mm-hmm. So all of our staff can, so some of the, what otherwise would have been invested in a central office, we take that budget and we distribute it so that people can use it for their home offices, and people appreciate that. Somebody asked a question in the chat about accommodating staff who prefer to work at home as well as who want to work in the office. We straddle that by offering to reimburse people if they want to go to a hub or a co-working space. We take that on as an expense that the organization will cover, so people are not forced to work from home. Or if they don't have a comfortable or safe place to work from home, they can go and find that, and the company will resource it. I use a tool a lot called Typeform. Google Polls does this as well. But it's a specific tool that allows me to create polls and surveys. I do a lot of question asking and gathering data from within my team to test, get more specific and objective feedback. And sometimes I'll get a sense about how things are going from things that I pick up in strands and meetings, but being able to go out to my whole team and sort of gather data in an organized way, I've found that to be a useful way of keeping my finger on the pulse of what's going on without making assumptions or without missing a part of the story. And then we also we try to travel budget to bring people together every 2 years. We haven't done that in a little while because of COVID. Hasn't felt like the right ask to say, get on a plane and come hang out with me. But we, in lieu of that, we do encourage staff to travel and see each other. And if people are going to include tagging on a part of a trip that they're on to go see a colleague, we cover the expenses for people to see each other in person. So there is a part of this like that can't be replaced, and sort of acknowledging that there is a different energy that happens when you are with people in person. I really appreciate this even more so on the other, well, supposedly the other side of the pandemic that we're apparently in now. But just from this vantage point, having worked alone and been mostly alone in my office for a couple of years, when I can see a colleague, the energy and the motivation and the morale lift is really important, really noticeable.
Mm-hmm. Thank you all so much. We're going to take a little pause here and catch up with some of the themes in the Q&A. You've addressed some of them naturally, but I want to come back to this question of training and uptake of new tools, because it feels like, even though maybe Casey, your team maybe uses a few more, and Danny, I love your phrase, we've gone deep rather than wide in tools and platforms. In both cases, though, getting to what you need requires full uptake from everybody who's part of the organization. So maybe Casey, do you have any kind of tips on introducing, training up, and encouraging full utilization of really essential tools?
Yes, I think that where this all begins is before the tool. It's sort of like we started talking about how we begin from culture and values. We begin with what we are trying to accomplish, like with any project. That's how we've approached this. So with most of the tools we were talking about, they relate to communication and collaboration. And so we started out by developing a very lengthy document around our communication guidelines that tie back into our culture and values, and very explicitly state how we expect people to operate within the organization and how that reflects what our goals are as an organization, so that people can understand where we're coming from. And also, they collaborated on this document with us. So it began as a leadership team document, and then we do ask for feedback from folks, and they can comment on that document. It's a living document, as all of our internal documents are.
What's it called again? Just
our document's just called our communication guidelines.
Okay.
It's not a great name, but it's a practical one. And under that umbrella, and I'm referring to it as we're talking here, we talk about pretty much everything under the sun. But one of the key parts is our expectation that people are not going to respond to everything immediately, which is an easy thing to slip into when you are a remote organization. And so we wanted to be very direct that was not our expectation, but sometimes you do need to be able to get in touch with people. So we talk about response time, we talk about who to talk to when, we talk about standards for email, pretty simple things that don't necessarily have to do with specific tools, but are the foundation for how we communicate and collaborate with one another. Mm-hmm. And from there, we then get into the tools. And when it comes to adoption of each of those, as I mentioned, we have tried on some of them and then failed on some of them, and then made decisions about how best to move forward from there. We do have an expectation that folks are going to be sufficiently tech savvy to get into these tools and be comfortable with them, which is it can be a barrier for some folks who are already in organizations, and it can make this kind of transition uncomfortable. So we do want to try to choose tools and set them up in such a way that just about anyone could use them, but there is still a threshold that people have to cross. And I think folks should not be afraid of having those expectations as long as they're fully explaining the reasons for things and providing the resources. We use, I'm going to call it lynda.com. It's not lynda.com anymore. It's LinkedIn Learning, I think. But we are strong believers in that platform for people learning tools. We provide membership to that, to all of our team members so that they can learn independently. We have done training sessions together when we've adopted new tools. So all of us go watch the same thing, because if we say that we're going to do it individually, we probably won't. So doing it as a team is also a good team building activity. We also have a channel in Slack. We do the same thing as Danny does, lots of different channels. We have a tech tips channel, which is where folks can share ideas and things that they've found useful about any tool that we use and beyond. And we also have tech tip sessions that are led by any team member who chooses to lead them, and where it could be as simple as, I'm going to show you how I manage my Gmail inbox. Which is probably different than how you do. And every time we've had one of these sessions, I have learned something new, because every single person uses technology differently. So all of this is tied to open communication and laying down those foundations.
You won't be surprised that people want to see your communications guidelines. So I'll negotiate with you after the session, and hopefully that or some version of that might show up in your follow-up email. This question about people getting overloaded, having too many platforms. Danny, you hinted at it in saying that you kind of have had to retire some things and have gotten requests from staff not to overload. Any tips on managing those kind of expectations and saturation and complaints?
Yeah, I mean, I think we take into consideration feedback, and we ask the question, very similar to what Casey said about any decisions we make on a platform. On a new platform, it's made democratically, and we try to engage our team around. So if we bring something on, people know it's coming. They've been able to weigh in around it. We'll sometimes joke. Lately, we've been like, "Are we going to stay with Basecamp, or are we going to leave Basecamp?" And it's become like it's like a fun conversation to have, because you have some team members who are like all for Basecamp, and so they like pitch, they make their case, and then so it's a fun conversation to have. But yeah, I mean, these are living decisions that we talk about the why, so that people know in something coming on that's new, a new platform, or even the maintaining of using a platform, we're clear on why are we doing this. We're not going to just have a platform that that doesn't have like really clear functionality and makes our lives easier. So that's always my consideration is, does it add value? Does it help folks? And if it starts to feel stale or cumbersome, that's the first indication that it's time for it to go.
I love those adjectives that you all are perceiving whether something has gotten stale. If it's not literally additive and facilitating something, it's just become sort of stale. I love that framework. Again, I think for those of us who haven't been working fully this way, one of the obvious takeaways is the agility with which, and the sort of democratic approach with which you approach using and introducing these tools. It's very different than sort of a top-down, here's our new model, we're sticking with it for 3 years, 5 years, however long our contract is. It's a very different approach, so appreciate that. Let's move forward a little bit, because there are a lot of questions about wellness and about boundaries and about people taking care of themselves. And I know that those are values that all three of your organizations hold. So I want to start with you, Casey, in terms of employee wellness and how you try to ensure that there isn't this 24/7 expectation or peer pressure. And as an executive director, the extent to which you feel able to model that.
Yeah, this is one of the most important aspects of my job. I inherited the organization as a 24/7 operation. That I was expected to respond to email at any time, and so I had to go through the process myself of making the decision to change that and then model that behavior. And it was an extremely difficult process. And it started with us thinking about what kind of organization are we? Because we're serving technologists, yes, but nothing that we are doing can't wait a little while. And that concept is very difficult to learn, particularly when you work with a large network of volunteers. Earlier on, when we were talking about how many staff members we have and how many other people are involved, I failed to mention the hundreds of volunteers who are involved in the work that we do, putting together the programs that we put forth as being key to our mission. And when those people volunteer their time, naturally we want to respond to them when they're able to contribute their time, which might not be during our normal workday. And that's how we slipped into this pattern. But it's not realistic. It's not sustainable. And so it started from that. This is not healthy. This is not good. And for this to work, I need to model that behavior. I need to not do it myself. And it was difficult to shift from that originally when we still had a physical office and were working a fairly traditional work schedule, because occasionally I would need to check email in the evening and such. Being able to shift to a fully remote environment where everyone works their own schedule has been the biggest change for us. And it was a slow change. We started out by having core hours where everyone was expected to be around a certain amount of time, regardless of time zones. And so we walked through all of these transitional steps until we landed at the place we are now, which is people work when they can and they shouldn't work too much. And we are all accountable for ourselves and we support each other in this. And so, as I mentioned earlier, we have this workplace where we're checking in and out. And if someone responds late at night, that's because when they were able to work, because they might have had another commitment. They might be a caretaker. They might be prioritizing getting out and going for a run because that's the time that they could do it. And they're making all of those decisions independently, and they are not accounting for those decisions to other people. So there's also something I practice and have to model, and it's very difficult to do, which is I don't tell my immediate team members, oh, I've got to run to the post office. We've tried to stop people from doing that because all of us feel this compulsion for saying, this is what I'm doing now. It might not be work, but I'm getting back to work, I promise. And that struggle is real. So dealing with that feeling and those natural impulses that are such a response to the way American work culture has been traditionally has been one of the key things that we've done. And so we've changed our calendaring practices. We used to account for time on the calendar a lot more than we do now. Now it's, unless you're gone for the whole day, please don't put stuff on the calendar. We don't need to know about your dentist appointment. And if you're not available when we send you a Slack message, that's okay. We'll get back to you when we're around. So all of that ties back to that document I mentioned and setting those standards and modeling that behavior.
It's so interesting. And it sounds like this took multiple years to get to. Am I overstating that?
No, you're not. So this is an ongoing project that is a decade in the making. And I still have moments where I'm processing those feelings of needing to be accountable to people, because you cannot shake those feelings overnight. And it does not mean that you're not a dedicated person to model this kind of behavior. And that's something that's hard to change as well.
Ooh, yeah, now we're getting into capitalism and Western practices, et cetera, and how hard those are to unlearn, and cultures of trust and real accountability as opposed to control. Danny, what would you add here? How do you try to create an environment that's not 24/7 for everyone?
Yeah, I mean, very similar to what Casey shared. I was very clear that when we built this organization, I wanted it to be a place that I would want to work, and that I wanted to create a culture that I have always wanted to see inside of organizations, but haven't always seen. And so this is another example. We focus on the deliverables. That is where our attention is in terms of instead of expecting someone to be at their desk at a particular time, just to be there and showing that they're working, we really focus on what are the things that role needs to accomplish and measure that person according to the deliverables that they're able to put forward, the ways that part of the organization is advancing and growing, and do the kind of wraparound support on that person in terms of what their needs are, professional development, strategizing every year for every role, and building that into the budget. We really look at how our team, the way that we do evaluations with our team is to think about what do you want to do next? After you leave this organization, where do you want to go? What are your goals in your career? And then let's help you get there. When you leave this organization, you should feel as though we poured into you as much as you poured into us. That is my mantra with my team, with the leads of each of the verticals. And so what I want to see when I look at everyone's evaluations, I want to see that they're engaging in professional development that's going to help them reach those goals. So for us, it is very much about, what is the productivity that's happening, not necessarily that they're at their desk at a particular time. I would say we're roughly 9 to 5, but it's not rigid. It operates that way because those are kind of the standard business hours in which you're going to have meetings and things like that with other partners. So, but we do not declare that. We are very clear. Like I said, we solve for making sure someone's working by the deliverables that they produce, not that they're sitting at their desk. Mm-hmm. We also have unlimited PTO policy. We established that at the very beginning. I had been in an organization that had that before, and found it to be incredibly helpful for some individuals. There are others who just don't take vacations. And so we have a minimum that you must take 4 weeks because we found that people don't take their time. And then me as a leader, I watch really closely what is happening in terms of our, whether we're having events or offerings or things like that, where everyone is kind of working to get to this thing. And I'm like, okay, we're going to shut down the office for a couple of days. Or at the end of this summer, we had so much going on in preparation for the anniversary of the hashtag this October, next month. I shut the office down for 2 weeks in August. I told them in June that we were going to do that so that they could plan trips, that they could do things. They could, some people just chose to take the time to organize their inbox. So it's really, on me to keep my finger on the pulse of what's happening, and check on the team. I'll also share that we have a wellness survey that we send out quarterly, and that includes I hired a psychologist to walk me through the 7 areas of wellness in a human being's life, and we ask them how they're doing. And some of these things have nothing to do with work. It's just a way, and we talk about it as a tool for them. We ask them, you should take this away and say, okay, do I need to focus on the wellness in this area of my life? Because I'm not feeling so great about that. And we don't always, as human beings, take the time to take stock of that kind of thing. But one of those sections is on their work balance or their work life. And I study those things when they come in quarterly and think about the ways in which people are well in the organization and where we can improve. And that's really an important piece of the puzzle. And I'm also happy to share that wellness survey.
Wonderful.
And so folks, if folks want to take a look at it, but like I said, we do it quarterly and it's been really helpful. The last thing I'll say is that we do quarterly in-person retreats.
Oh, great. That was one of the questions people had about whether you do any in-person gathering.
Yes, we do quarterly in person for 3 days at least. And this one that we just did, we did for 4 days. So it's usually 3 or 4 days of a full day in person for planning, but for all of the things, right? Being in person, spending time together, let's figure out an activity that everybody wants to do. And we do it in a different city each time during the year. And, you know, I try to make it fun. We do polls. Where do you want to be? And then I kind of make a decision based on how much money we have. But I, you know, I definitely keep track of, okay, they really want to go to Chicago. Let's figure out how, like, what time of year we could get to Chicago. Also when it's not freezing, you know, that kind of thing. So they love being in person. And so they look forward to those retreats. And I've just found it to be, and now that, you know, we're able to do it in person again, after the pandemic, it's been a big, it just boosts all kinds of things.
Yeah. I bet it's even more special because you're mostly virtual. People don't take that space for granted. Burton, we're getting a little bit short on time. Is there anything that you want to add quickly to the wellness conversation, or we'll move on to hiring? Please.
Just really quick. There's a number of questions in the Q&A about sort of monitoring when people are going to work.
Yeah.
And I think like there's just a nuance there. If you create too much of a culture of like having to clock in and clock out, and a sense of being watched on that, it can actually work really against it can work really against you. What we do is we expect everybody to let everybody know what their regular work schedule is going to be, and we give them a fair amount of flexibility around that. And then we have a Slack channel for just being able to note exceptions to that. You don't have to go through a supervisor. You got to step out of the office. You step out of the office. But there is a real concern and an issue with people overworking in this without the I'm going here and I'm going to work here and then I am leaving this space and I am going to my home. Like, you bring all of the work into your home, and most people have no training on how to like manage those boundaries. So I think providing some frameworks for people and preparing them to not work all the time and being thoughtful about how you communicate with people, because from a managerial perspective, the desire is towards wanting to have control and visibility and transparency and knowing what's actually going on. And if you express that, or if you sort of put that message out there too much, you can accelerate people's like this push and this feeling of like, I need to be available all the time. I need to be working all the time. And that is not what you want. You want a sustainable long-term workforce. So we try to focus on a long-term messaging and sustainability. And if we notice that somebody is not maybe as lively or doesn't seem to have as much energy, we try to check in with them. Knowing what people's calendars are does not mean that they're available. Asking people if they are available and developing a very explicit culture about how you ask for people to show up for you, especially if you're in leadership, that's really important, so that people don't feel like they have to show up all the time. People need to have their lives separate from all of this important stuff that we do.
Yeah, it reminds me of what we say a lot as we explore human resources, as we do a lot in this program, that we have this tendency to design our programs and policies for the person who's not performing for whatever reason, as opposed to for all the people who are performing, right? And so again, you know, I think we're trying to set what is the best way for people to identify their best way to work. Again, whether you're virtual or not, right? But certainly in a virtual world, and set policies that encourage that. I want to talk about hiring, because a number of you mentioned that this is appealing in this really complicated workforce and marketplace. Being virtual has appeal in terms of attracting talent, not having to be in a particular region, et cetera. We don't have a ton of time. So just in a minute or so, Danny, how does being a virtual organization impact your ability to hire and recruit?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have used all of the virtual tools to bring in new talent, to recruit and engage folks, and have all kinds of different platforms that we use to push out this job or that job, if it's comms, if it's something else. And so, we have found that most folks have really enjoyed the fact how we're structured, because they know that they will be able to gather with their team members, just not super often. It's not the infrastructure, but that there will be moments throughout the year that they will be able to be in person with them. But it also has helped us to, I think, identify, it's important for us, and I talk about this in our recruitment process a lot, to really be honest about, what it is that, if the person has never worked virtually before, really be honest about their challenges, right? And we don't try to sugarcoat it. We really try to say that, we want people to come in and think about who they are, how they like to work, what is their desired environment. It may not be for everyone. There are folks who really do not want to work from home. And we've taken it a step further in understanding that there are folks who may want to work with us where home does not feel safe.
Yeah.
And so we think about that. To Burton's point, we offer reimbursements, and, if folks want to be able to work outside of their homes. But we try to have that conversation before we ever bring someone on the team, so that it's not something that should be discussed after they're already in the organization. It should be something that we really try to talk honestly about at the onset. So I'll stop there. I know we're short on time.
Sure. Thank you. Appreciate it. Casey, anything you would add here in terms of recruitment?
I don't think I have anything to add that hasn't already been said.
Okay, great. Appreciate underscoring that some people may not have done this before, and they may want to work with your organization. And that means part of the recruitment process is orienting to what this is like and preparing people for it, not just the advantages, but some of the challenges or requirements. And Danny, you talked about the entrepreneurialism you look for, and it seems like that's well matched in terms of being remote. What about, and we've certainly been addressing equity in some ways throughout this conversation, but I want to address it explicitly because it also comes up a lot as a concern in terms of how does everyone feel like they can access this, they're included in this. And I want to see how being virtual and having a remote workforce has been supportive of your equity and inclusion commitments, and or where you have felt some challenges. Danny, what comes up for you there?
Yeah, we've found that it in a lot of ways, I think overwhelmingly, it allows for our equity commitments to thrive. Overwhelmingly, it has. We are an organization that centers under-resourced communities in our work. Our commitment in interrupting sexual violence is you start with the communities that experience it the most. It happens to be communities of color, communities across the gender and sexuality spectrum, communities that are disabled. So we really focus, that's where our work is centered. And so another reason why the virtual infrastructure works for us is because of the fact that it allows us to forward our commitments to under-resourced communities. But we are very clear sort of on the front end with folks, again, if there are challenges that they are facing to be able to work at home. So if they're in a community that just does not get the proper Wi-Fi to be able to be participatory. If they, again, a safety concern, if they're in a community where they don't feel safe being at home, if all of those things are really important for us to, and those aren't disqualifying factors, right? Those are things that we create spaciousness inside of our organization to address. And I think that, the ways that we have to be careful are around any neurodivergence, any ways that people learn differently, we have to be really careful in that way. So if we have folks on our team who have different physical challenges, and we have to solve for those. And we do that, and it's built into our programs as well. But even if there are folks who've had some vision issues in the wake of the pandemic, for example, of being looking at a screen for each and every day, and how do we work with them? These are all considerations that we make and that we have and that we work with our various teams on. So for this one instance, just to share quickly, that having some vision issues that were exacerbated during the pandemic, we have made we've talked to the team, and folks are doing phone calls with that person right now. They're not, so that her when she's in meetings, she's able to not look at a computer and her eyes are able to rest a bit. Or I tell, we are in conversation, do you need to take a couple of days off? Whatever the thing is, right? You have to be ready to work with them. And I think there are some challenges for folks being that, when we are virtual, you are going to be using technology. And so what challenges does that bring up with the team, and how do you make sure that you aren't disqualifying folks from participation inside of your work because of it?
Extremely helpful. Thank you. Casey, what would you add, or what has been your experience in transforming to virtual and keeping or advancing your equity and inclusion commitments?
I echo a lot of the same things that Danny has said, as per usual. And one of the things that we emphasize, and we've done throughout this program, is transparency and communication is such an important part of this. And so we're talking about that with both existing and potential employees, about the way our work functions, what is absolutely required, and what tools we use, what someone might be asked to do, and then what are the possible workarounds we can offer, and how can our team, because this isn't just one person within an organization, we are a team, how can other team members accommodate other people to balance out the work that we need to achieve? So sometimes it is not physically possible for someone to do something, whether it is a mental restriction or what have you. There are all these different ways that this can manifest. And so we want to look at, how does the whole team accomplish these goals? So maybe someone else can assist with something. And we want to be creative about those solutions. And that this model has forced us to think creatively in ways that I never would have expected. And it should not be the default. We can't do that. It should be, how do we do that? Still being true to who we are as an organization and being true to our team. And also, balancing everyone's goals and needs, which is a very difficult thing to do as well.
Really helpful. I feel like this sometimes happens, right, where we're having a discussion through the door of virtual work, but I actually feel like we're having a discussion about the future of the workforce and what people need for a healthy, collaborative, accountable in a deep way, where leadership's accountable too, not just control, kind of workforce. And that I know you all made this transformation before COVID, but I think for a lot of the rest of us, COVID is what accelerated that. And what you just said, Casey, reminds us that there are so many things that we've learned because of COVID, some of us, because of having to go virtual, that we need to really investigate in terms of our own practices and what we're going to keep, even if we keep a bricks and mortar office of some sort. So it's just interesting how it ripples out from there. I want to give each of you a chance to just share a closing thought, maybe some guidance. As you remember from the opening poll, there's only about a fifth of the people on the call who are already completely virtual. So most people on the call are either considering it or somewhere on the journey that Casey, you were on a few years ago. And so let me move to that and just invite you each to share a closing thought. And Danny, do you want to start?
Sure. So first, I know we didn't get a chance to answer all of the questions in the chat, and just want to make it clear that I'm always sort of available to chime in and do that in the, in the report out that goes out after this. Certainly open to that, or having any conversations with folks who are thinking about going virtual. I think the thing to start with, is back to the beginning. One of the first things that we talked about, which is to really operate from who you are as an organization, who you say you are as an organization, and really starting from that place. And if you haven't already done so, to really do the exercise of determining your organizational values and start at that place. And even thinking about whether to go virtual, because it should speak to your values. Anything about your organization should. And so doing that exercise will give you the guide rails to really think through whether going virtual is right for you. And then the other thing I'd say is just, that this should be not something that is entered into quickly, or that it can go, you can move at the speed of trust with something like this. And it's something that you should transparently say. We're, at our organization, we always say, we try to struggle well and fail fast. Mm-hmm. And, it's that we know challenges exist in any sort of change. There's always challenge, and be honest about it and be willing to address it head on when there are challenges, but to understand that this is something you can phase into over time. And I'm sure Casey can speak to that even more, but it's really something that should, at the end of the day, speak to the values and principles that you have as an organization.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Casey, let me get your very quick answer there.
All right, my soundbite is, no risk, no reward here. This is a huge risk for your organization to take any of these steps as you go along, and it might feel scary and risky, but all of these are calculated risks that we've taken in the spirit of what our organizations are trying to accomplish. And I encourage you to be calculated risk takers as you're thinking about this.
Thank you. And Burton, a final word from you, please.
Yeah, Casey, I really like that, and similar to what I was thinking, because there's a lot of questions coming up from the group about where, kind of how do I trust my team with this, and how do I know if this is going to work out with the team that I have? And it probably won't. Like, if you're coming from a place of I don't know if this person or that person is going to work, there will be change is going to surface new problems and new things, and it won't work for everybody. And certainly we've had people on our team who our model has not been the right fit for, and therefore it just didn't work. So there's no solution or way forward into this new way of working that is a one size fits all, or that will eliminate risk or make it just smooth and work perfectly for everybody. And it takes being very tuned in to your team and focused on your people and really committed to what's best for both the organization, the mission, and your individual employees, and figuring out the creative solution that fits that shape.
Thank you so much. And I saw Danny and Casey's heads nodding vigorously that like any significant change management process that is in the best interest of your organization, even so, not everybody's going to align with it or have an easy time with it. That's not the sign of success, is what I'm hearing you say, that there will be challenges for folks, but there's also a huge benefit, as there has been for all three of your organizations. Thank you so much for the preparation you did for today, and for sharing all of these insights, and for the long list of tools that you recommend, which we will gather and send with the recording. Thank you all for being here and for your great questions. Our next leadership webinar on October 20th, we're coming back to the issue of executive transitions. and have a wonderful panel of folks at Funder, consultants who are going to talk about what executive transition practices we can let go of, especially as we support incoming BIPOC, next gen, directly impacted folks into leadership seats. So we hope to see you there. And now it's time to do the evaluation. Thank you again, Burton, Casey, and Danny for your excellent comments, and Danny for your beautiful offer to be in touch with folks. All been so generous with your time and wisdom. Thank you.